grenade flew past the tank. A minute later, another grenade struck the tank. Here are two Russian tanks that ventured out for a counterattack, but the Ukrainians destroyed one of the tanks with a precise hit from an anti-tank missile. Shortly after, another tank was destroyed. Crew couldn't control the tank and sent it into a ditch. Later, the tank exploded and turned it into scrap metal. Another Russian tank approached close to the Ukrainian positions and was spotted by reconnaissance. With the help of a kamikaze drone, the tank was successfully ignited. The Russians tried to extinguish it but failed. They abandoned the tank and fled while the tank burned down completely. However, to be objective, it must be acknowledged that the Russians also managed to inflict painful losses on the Ukrainian forces. For example, the Russians found and destroyed a Ukrainian Tu-S1 artillery system along with its ammunition. As the Ukrainians advance, they attack Russian positions with the support of tanks. However, during the offensive, the Ukrainians have to clear mines from roads and fields to allow their armored vehicles to pass through. The Russians have created heavily mined areas, and the Ukrainians have to spend a lot of time and effort to breach the minefields. To understand the extent to which the Russians have mined Ukrainian fields and roads, take a look at this video. A Ukrainian armored transporter was returning to the rear, but even there, it encountered a mine and detonated. And even the Russians sometimes fall into their own mines. For example, a Russian tank was returning to its positions and detonated on its own mine. Ukrainian sapper teams are working in the liberated territories. This is also a very complex job. The discovered Russian mines are collected and then destroyed by detonating them together. Ukrainian generals, led by Mr. Zahozny, have focused on destroying Russian logistics. They are destroying bridges and ammunition depots belonging to the Russians. Recently, Ukrainian aviation targeted and destroyed a bridge that served as the route for 70% of ammunition supplies to Russian forces. In this video, two Ukrainian armored transporters are moving along the road. The first one passed through a mined area unharmed, while the second one detonated on a mine. To clear the passages, Ukrainian forces use specialized demining vehicles. The process itself looks very impressive, but takes a lot of time. Sometimes demining operations are conducted during offensive operations. It is a complex task that requires a high level of coordination among all units. Here's another instance where a Russian modern tank, the T-90, was detected by Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance. It was targeted with an X-caliber projectile and destroyed. Additionally, the X-caliber projectile destroys numerous Russian artillery systems like the Tu-S19 and Grad BM-1, as well as multiple ammunition depots hidden by the Russians in abandoned houses and gardens. The Russian tank attempted to hide from the Ukrainian artillery behind the trees, but the Ukrainian reconnaissance spotted its location. A precision strike with an X-caliber guided projectile was launched against the tank. The result is evidence. There's the destruction of a Western-made Ukrainian armored vehicle, and logistics vehicles as well. However, in response, the Ukrainians launched massive attacks using FPV drones, destroying even more Russian armored vehicles. I can make a video several hours long, showing the extensive losses of Russian military equipment from the strikes of Ukrainian army drones. The Russians know how dangerous these small Ukrainian drones are and fear them so much. As soon as they spot a Ukrainian drone nearby, they immediately abandon their armored vehicles and flee. The Ukrainian forces have also perfected their aerial reconnaissance on the battlefield. It involves a drone capable of dropping grenades. This weapon should not be underestimated. The drone can locate an ammunition depot and destroy it with just a single grenade. Moreover, the drones are capable of destroying a vast number of armored Russian vehicles. Perhaps no other weapon has destroyed as much armored machinery as the bomber drones. Nothing can compare to this weapon on the front lines of combat. The Russians do not know how to combat drones. They have no solution to this problem. Watch how the projectiles explode and scatter in different directions. The X-caliber is a highly advanced 155mm caliber projectile equipped with GPS guidance and can be fired from almost any NATO standard 155mm howitzer. It is evident that in preparation for the offensive, the Ukrainian army has stockpiled a sufficient number of such projectiles to destroy hundreds or even thousands of units of Russian equipment. Economically, this is also a favorable exchange. The cost of a single projectile is approximately $100,000, whereas it can destroy a tank worth $3 million or other significant Russian equipment. The Ukrainian army continues its offensive. Ukrainians are exerting immense pressure on the Russian defense line through concentrated artillery fire from all types of guns, ranging from the smallest to the largest. Take a look at how skillfully and accurately the Ukrainian forces are using precision-guided munitions like the Excalibur. Today, I'll show you the best moments of the combat actions. In this video, you can see a Russian self-propelled howitzer 2S9 taking position in a forested area. The Ukrainian forces noticed it and delivered a precise strike with just a single projectile. It resulted in a massive explosion since the ammunition detonated along with the howitzer. For instance, in this video, you can see how a Russian drone, the Lancet, hit a German Leopard tank and ignited it from the inside. However, the tank's turret wasn't blown off because all its ammunition was stored in a separate compartment. If a Russian tank catches fire with ammunition inside, it will most likely explode. We have witnessed numerous cases where Russian tanks have their turrets blown off. On another front segment, the Russians attacked Ukrainian positions with the assistance of 3 tanks. However, under the pressure of Ukrainian artillery, all 3 tanks were damaged. One of the tanks had its turret blown off, as is typical with Russian tanks. By the way, this is a significant difference between German tanks and Russian tanks. The video clearly shows a minefield nearby. It appears that the tank accidentally drove over one of the mines. The Russians abandoned that tank. Here's another Russian tank that detonated on its own mine. The Russians abandoned the tank and fled the battlefield. The Ukrainian soldiers destroyed the tank using a kamikaze drone. And sometimes, mines behave very deceitfully and unpredictably. Interestingly, the Russians do not possess such highly accurate artillery capabilities. As a result, in order to hit a target, the Russians have to use hundreds of projectiles and old 40-year-old howitzers or resort to multiple rocket launch systems. Consequently, the Russians will sooner or later experience a severe shortage of ammunition. In their attempts to halt the Ukrainian offensive, the Russians are conducting clumsy counterattacks, but they are losing even more armored vehicles. Ukrainian army also suffers significant losses from Russian kamikaze drones like the Lancet. Here's an instance where such a drone destroys a Ukrainian S-300 air defense complex. Here's another such case. These are very painful losses for the Ukrainians. And here, the Lancet destroys Ukrainian armored vehicles. The Lancet is also capable of destroying Ukrainian tanks. In this video, we can see how the Russians tracked a Ukrainian Grad multiple rocket launcher system and destroyed it using the same Lancet drone. Additionally, Ukrainians systematically destroy Russian fuel reserves and ammunition depots. Several large ammunition storage facilities have been destroyed in the past weeks. Sooner or later, this will have an impact on the Russian strategic defense, and it will be breached. No matter how much military equipment and personnel you have, if you lack ammunition, you will lose. Ultimately, the war will be won by those who have better logistics and provisions.